Welcome to Story Shamans! Hey! How'd you get in here? Oh, animals, it's you! Hello! Come inside! Let's talk about stuff. This week we're talking about Cubby number 8. Genre. It's a good one. I'm excited. First things first, let's define genre, as this term can be interpreted a few different ways. We're gonna go ahead and define genre by tone. There are 8 different genres, 8 different tones that your story can have. Comedy, tragedy, drama, farce, action, horror, romance, and erotica. Comedy is happy. Tragedy is sad. Drama is serious. Farce is silly. Action is exciting. Horror is scary. Romance is idealistic. And erotica is sexy. Yeah. Your story will have one dominant genre that'll set the overall tone of your story. And then you could bring in other genres along the way to deviate from that overall tone. Like adding romance to an action story. It's an action story first, but there's some romance thrown in there as well. Or adding comedy to a horror story. It's a horror story, but we've thrown in some jokes and humor to lighten things up here and there. Clearly, there are many possible combinations of these genres. But no matter the combination, your primary genre determines what your story is on its most fundamental level. And these tones, these genres, give audiences basic expectations. It's the storyteller's job to meet these basic expectations when telling a particular kind of story. Comedies need to be lighthearted and funny, or they've failed to meet the basic expectations of a comedy. Misunderstand or mishandle genre, and your story will collapse. The most important concept to remember when dealing with genre is that genre is not based on content. It's about tone. Genre determines the emotional tone and the emotional context of the content in your story. Genre doesn't determine the events of your story. It determines the way in which the events unfold. The same event can occur within the 8 different genres. Let's take, for example, a train ride. It could be serious, it could be silly, it could be happy or sad, exciting, scary, romantic, or it could be sexy. Or it could be all of these things at different times. Or at the same time. But note that the tone of your story itself did not dictate that a train ride occur. The events of the story are expressed through the story's tone, but the tone doesn't dictate the events. You'll notice that some of these genres are in direct opposition with one another. You got drama and farce, comedy and tragedy. They're opposites, and therefore the hardest to mix with each other. There are also complementary genres. Romance and erotica, action and horror. These easily go together because they're in the same vein. For instance, action is exciting and horror is scary. Part of excitement is that feeling of being a little scared. One feeds into the other. Put them together, and you've got the so-called thriller story. It's just action plus horror. When combining genres, you gotta get the mix right, or you'll ruin your story. If we're talking about mixing genres, comedy, action, romance, and erotica all mix nicely together because they all have a generally positive tone. Because of this shared overall positive sense, they complement each other. Drama, tragedy, and horror all mix well together because they share a generally negative tone. Just remember you got one dominant genre, and you incorporate the others as you can within that dominant genre. Let's take the example of romantic comedies. Grammatically, most of them should be called comedic romances, because that's what they are. A predominant romance story with comedic elements. A good example of a story like this would be How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days. A romance story with some jokes. On the flip side, a true romantic comedy would be something like Wedding Crashers. It's a comedy first, with a lot of romantic elements. It's always easier to have a set predominant genre and then add comedy to it, rather than setting comedy as your main genre and then adding a different genre to it. Take action comedies, for example. It's a lot more organic to have an action story and then add humor, rather than have a comedic story that throws in bits of action. Action is exciting, and excitement is more serious than funny. It's always easier to lighten the mood with a joke than to turn a baseline comedic situation serious all of a sudden. You may be asking yourself, what's the difference between romance and erotica? Well, let me tell you. This other guy's gonna say it. Romance is really about accentuating, focusing on, and admiring all of the positive qualities of something while ignoring all the negative. You could have this outlook toward a person, a relationship, a city, a sport, anything really. You can romanticize anything. Erotica is all about sexually charging a situation. ladies, celebrating and experiencing the specific sexual and sensual attributes of a moment. Again, this attitude can be used with anything. You can erotically approach another person, a city, a job, a lifestyle. You can eroticize anything. These two genres may seem similar at first glance, but that's really only because two people who are romantically involved usually eventually become erotically involved as well. While this may happen with your characters, remember that genre does not dictate content. It's about tone. So the genre won't dictate that your characters become romantically or erotically involved. But the tone will dictate how this information will be presented if it does occur. Understanding genre is really about understanding the differences and the similarities between the 8 different tones. Comedy, tragedy, drama, farce, action, horror, romance, and erotica. The more familiar you are with them, the more seamlessly you can weave them together while crafting your story. Next week, we're moving on to emotion. Here come the waterworks!